is the Arise Exchange here on Arise News. As far as rate decisions are concerned, Rwanda's Monetary Policy Committee kept its rate at 6.75%, underscoring its focus on price stability while backing continued economic growth. Analysts had expected the hold, noting inflation remained within the target range.
Central Bank, our primary mandate remains price stability, ensuring price stability, but also safeguarding a stable and inclusive financial system. And in this session, we will outline the rationale behind our recent decisions as MPC and FSC, how they align with our commitment to prudent macroeconomic management, which is really the foundation for investments and trade, but most importantly for trust in our financial system. And so first, the Monetary Policy Committee assessed the developments of the global economy, which continues to perform better than expected, supported by easing trade tensions, stable supply chains, despite ongoing trade policy uncertainties and geopolitical tensions. Looking at projections of global economic growth in 2025, they were revised slightly upward by the IMF to 3.2%, projected global GDP growth in 2025, and to 3.1% growth in 2026. For sub-Saharan Africa, economic growth is projected to stabilize at 4.1% this year, and rise to 4.4% in 2026. Looking at global inflation trends, which the committee evaluates because they have an impact on our own inflation as Rwanda, we observed that inflation continued to ease. Globally, inflation is projected to reach 4.2%, which is a decline from 5.8% that we had in 2024. However, for sub-Saharan Africa, inflation remains high. Although declining, it will stand at 13.1%. That's the projection for inflation in sub-Saharan Africa in 2025. Global inflation drivers and decline reflect better supply conditions, but also the base effects from previous price hikes. And here I need to mention that contrary to the first half of the year, where because of trade policy shifts and US tariffs, we were expecting to have higher inflation. However, the private sector globally adapted, front-loading their stocks, but also ensuring diversification of their supply chains. That's why we are seeing that inflation at global level will continue to decrease for 2025. And even further, for projection for 2026, forecasts are at 3.7% for global inflation. The elevated inflation in our region is mainly driven by certain countries in Southern Africa, but also the Horn of Africa, where currency pressures and volatile food prices persist. In fact, some of the economies in sub-Saharan Africa are experiencing extremely high inflation, above or around 50%, which significantly raises inflation projection for sub-Saharan Africa. Moving on to commodity prices, which remain an important driver of external balances, but also inflation trends globally and in our country. We can see that energy prices will decline by 12.4% this year and continue to decline further in 2026 by 10.2%. And this is driven mainly by the decline in crude oil prices globally following OPEC's plans to boost production, but also increase supply. Although crude oil prices are expected to decline by close to 16% in 2025, for Rwanda fuel pump prices we've seen remain high due to transport costs mainly. And regarding food prices, they are expected to decline by 6.1% in 2025, and this should be translated to less imported inflation for Rwanda. Lastly, prices of other commodities, such as metals and minerals, remain elevated, increasing by 1.8% on average, but this supports Rwanda's exports earnings, as we will see in a minute.